千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Lao Zi. As ever, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I want to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. So now, without further ado, let's get right back into 75. We began our discussion last time with this chapter with this title, Value Life. 贵生章. So that's the title in Chinese that you see at the bottom there. As I mentioned previously, the meaning of this title and also its appearance toward the end of the chapter, these get confused all the time. That is the benefit for us to have discussions like this. I can convey to you the authentic teachings that will clear up the confusion. Now, the source of the confusion is that typically when we see value life, and this is just a verbatim literal translation of the original, we see value life, we all assume that is a good thing. Why should we not value life? Why should we not, for instance, refrain from killing? That's actually not what it means. As we will see in our discussion, it specifically means valuing life in excess, excessive pursuits of the pleasures of life in the material world. That leads to negative consequences. So we'll talk about that more. So last time we did our sectional analysis. This chapter is not a long chapter. As you can see, we have 11 lines. They are divided up in a way that is a little bit different than the chapters that we have seen previously. There's a very specific structure here, and you can see the structure just by looking at the reiterating words. You can see that in the English because it's a faithful translation of the original. And then you can also look pictorially, visually at the Chinese characters and pick out the same characters that repeat from line to line. And that kind of gives you a clue. So here's the sectional analysis that we did previously. As you can see, first we identified repeating patterns. First two characters of line 1, 4, and 7 are the same. They are translated the same way, as you can see in the English side. So we label that repeating pattern A. Then we step one line down and we see that lines 2, 5, and 8 are repeating patterns also. They are the same characters. And again, they are translated the same way in the English, as you can see. We're going to call that repeating pattern B. Then we got one more repeating pattern, and that's line 3, 6, and 9. Repeating pattern C. So similarities, similar characters in the ancient Chinese, and similar translation in the modern English. So now you can see that we have 3 sets of 3 lines. And I say that this is unusual because poetic structure in ancient Chinese poetry oftentimes would be more like A-B, like repeating couplets forming 4 lines. And then another structure forming 8 lines. So it will be 2, 4, 8. Here we've got 3, 9, repeating 3 lines, repeating 3 times, forming a total of 9 lines. That gives us an easy way to mark the sections. As you can see, 1, 2, and 3 will form section 1, 4, 5, and 6, section 2, 7, 8, 9, section 3, leaving the last 2 lines as the concluding line. So sometimes Daodejing chapters have an introductory part followed by the main portion of the chapter and then the concluding lines. In this case, we begin immediately with the 3 sets of 3 lines, and then the last 2 lines are the conclusion. So for this one, there's no intro lines, there's no introductory lines. So before we leave this structure here, a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, what we're doing now, what we're doing right now, and as we have done with every chapter, is absolutely unique in the Western study of the Daodejing. There's not going to be any other sources of mainstream reading material that will explain the structure, sort of the hidden sections of a Daodejing chapter, the way that we've been doing for every single chapter. And this will actually give us insights. For now, what you want to do is just to pay attention to what the English translation says. It is talking, the 3 sections are all talking about the people's disposition, how the people feel, how they are, what they do, etc. They all start with that. And then they all go into the reason for that. And then the concluding line for that section. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the first one is about hunger. The second one, the second section, as you can see in the English, the difficulty in being governed. And then the third section, disregard for death. All 3 are equally important. All 3, on the face of it, at the superficial level, appear to address the dynamics between ancient rulers and their subjects, the ancient kings or emperors, and the subjects of the kingdom or citizens of the empire. That's what it seems like, and that's where many people stop. In reality, previously we talked about how every chapter of the Daodejing can be interpreted on 3 levels. One is the ancient situation, perhaps the ruling elite in the kingdoms in ancient times, and then the other corresponding section that we can map to is the implication to modern life. So the advice is not for the ancient kings, the ancient rulers, it's actually for you and me. And in a way, we can see ourselves as the rulers in our own lives, that we have the private kingdom of empire where we are the ruler of that. And then the last layer is what it says about spiritual cultivation. Today, we're going to focus on the first 2 layers to map back and forth, because by that mapping, we will automatically arrive at suggestions and guidelines as far as spiritual cultivation. And that's how you really are supposed to study the Daodejing. But then those who don't really know how they've been studying generation after generation will assume, oh, that these are just advice for the king, it's the ancient political treatise. That's not true. It's a guidebook for modern living as well. One does not exclude the other. So last time we talked about the hunger part, and you always want to map the ancient to the modern. And in this case, we are going to realize toward the very end, the concluding lines, the 2 lines at the very end, they actually do not address the ruler at all. Those are general statements that apply for everyone. So That means when we are now applying the ancient times to modern times, we're actually on the right path. So previously, we talked about both. We talked about how the ancient tyrants would starve the people. The people would go hungry, and that would certainly sow the seeds of discontent. And then we map that to modern life. Remember, in the modern context, you are both the king or queen and subjects being ruled. You are the kingdom, you are the empire. And therefore, we want to create a correspondence between what Lao Tzu says about the ancient rulers and about you and me living today. Here is what we ended up with last time as a recap. So the top line there in blue is just a straightforward expression of how the lines go. Hunger due to excessive taxation, so the people starve. That seems straightforward. When we map that to you, to your life, the kingdom that is your life, then the hunger that we're talking about, that's actually your hunger as well, you playing the parts of the subjects. And specifically, this is about spiritual hunger, yearning for something more than what we can see, what we can find, what we can obtain in the material world. So the reason why there is that spiritual hunger and yearning is due to excessive pursuit of material things. So what Lao Tzu is saying is that this is actually quite common. So unfortunately, in ancient times, throughout the history of China, tyranny has been rather common. In today's world, we definitely see prevalence among people that are pursuing the material world, not knowing that there is a spiritual alternative and feeling that gnawing emptiness. And that's the last part of it. When you are pursuing material things to excess, not paying enough attention to the spiritual side of things, you are going to feel the void. So that's the correspondence between the two. Then we're going to get into the second section. We started doing that last time. We did not actually get to complete the entire discussion. We talked about how the second section is about the ancient subjects of a kingdom becoming difficult to govern. Difficult to govern in the context of being disobedient, being resistant to the laws that's being imposed on them from higher up. So the tyrants may double down. We know that the tyrants may impose even more rules, more punishment, and stricter enforcement. Now, it doesn't solve the problem. It leads to more evasion, more opposition. The situation gets worse until one day it deteriorates beyond the point of no return. We've seen that quite a few times. And then we talked about how the difficulty, the disobedience, the sidestepping of the emperor or the king is due to excessive meddling. So when we talk about burdensome regulations and unreasonable laws, those are manifestations of the ruler being excessively wanting to meddle in people's lives. It isn't just the ruler, it's the entire ruling structure. So under the corrupt king or emperor, there are corrupt officials at every level of government. They take their cues from higher up. So if the king doesn't really care but just wants to enjoy life, or the emperor is just into living it up, then the corrupt officials will do the exact same thing. At every level, they're going to want to take their cut. So when the levels filter down from the king or emperor to the people, then taxation goes back up that same chain, and at every stop along the way, corrupt officials take their cut so they can also live it up. And this is a miserable situation for the people. It's draconian laws, it's harsh punishment. They take their toll. They make the people afraid until they become unafraid. So the unafraid part is the next section. Before we get to that, let's finish our discussion of the second set of 3 lines. So we're in section 2 right now. So here we're at the point where we talk about how people are pushed to the limits and beyond. They become resentful. So on the surface level, in front of officials, in front of law enforcement, they may appear to obey. They may appear to go through the motions. While behind the back of government officials, they use clever tricks to sidestep the tyrannical rule imposed by the tyrant. And this is something that we know definitely happens in every iteration of tyranny throughout human history. So this is something that Lao Zi is very mindful of. So by the time that Lao Tzu wrote the Daodejing 2,500 years ago, there's already been at least 2,000 years of history before his time when the same patterns repeated themselves over and over again. Therefore, Lao Tzu was very much aware of the cycles of tyranny, oppression, revolt, freedom, something new, corruption again, and the cycle repeats itself. He was very much aware of the cycles of history. He was a historian. He was the person responsible for keeping the royal archives with all the historical records. So he expressed his understanding more than a few times in the Daodejing, and I have an example from Daodejing chapter 65, where he talks about how the difficulty in governing people is due to their excessive cleverness. So that's talking from the perspective of the ruler. People are excessively clever. It doesn't matter how you try to govern them. They are going to slip away. They are very slippery, slip away from your grasp. And the expression in line 4 of chapter 65, it happens to be the exact same 4 characters as the 4 characters in line 4 of this chapter. So these 2 chapters are 65 and 75. They're 10 chapters apart, but the 4 characters in line 4 are exactly the same. That is no accident. So that's the difficulty part in governing people. And let me just make another point connected to that. And the point is, how do we map section 2 into the modern world? In section 1, the starvation of the people translates to what happens when you feel a spiritual hunger, something more than the material world. How about this section? How can you map the difficulty for the ruler to govern the people to some kind of difficulty in our modern lives? And as you can see here, the first bullet for the modern world, this section speaks to personal relationships. So you, as the ruler of your own private kingdom, that is your life, you have diplomatic relations with other kingdoms, other people, other sovereign rulers. You also have relationships with yourself as well as the people in your life, family, friends, relatives, acquaintances, co-workers. The list goes on. So the difficulty in governing the population for the ruler translates, therefore, to difficulties in personal relationships, the difficulty in managing one's life in terms of connections with people. And the same thought about meddling applies. Sometimes people get pretty attached to different things. They can't help but interfere into other people's business. And sometimes we do the same. So it is possible for all of us to be trapped in attachment, unable to stop meddling, to stop messing with something that would be better left alone. Sometimes we cannot stop ourselves from wanting to do or say something when the better strategy, the Tao would say that, hold off one moment, the time isn't right yet to take action, observe the situation unfold. And very often you find that as the situation unfolds, more information is revealed and showing you illuminated pathway as to how best to resolve the situation. Something you would have missed if you rushed into meddling or interference. So of course, meddling, interference leads to contention. It alienates people. People don't want to be near you because you're just going to interfere with what they feel is their own business. So people will be evasive, and that just means that people are not able to respond to you in the way that you would want them to. So this applies to the different aspects of your life as well. So for instance, you may initiate something good, maybe a positive connection with other people, but then things will go bad at some point, and you, in effect, have sabotaged your own success. So overall, I think you can see it is very easy for a situation like that where you get less and less harmony in your life. It makes everything more and more difficult, harder to manage. The difficulty in governing people, difficulty in governing your life or managing your life. So with that, we're ready to compare the ancient times, which is just a straightforward expression of the original writing from Lao Tzu. The difficulty in governance is due to meddling from the ruler, and that's why there's difficulty. And let's go ahead and map it into modern life. The difficulty we tend to have in personal connections, relationships, can oftentimes be due to excessive attachment, unable to let something go. You know, that busybody tendency to interfere, it's going to cause contention, it can cause friction, definitely overall produces a lack of harmony for you. So that's how we go from the ancient times to modern times. That is the second section. And now what we can do is that we can delve into the third. Remember, there are 3 sections of 3 lines each. So we're now going to be getting into section 3. Line 7 says the people's disregard for death. So what I want to do with this line is to break up the 4 characters that you see there. The 4 Chinese characters, what do they mean? The first character means people, citizens, subjects of the empire. The second character there, that's the Chinese character for the apostrophe S. So in English, we just have the apostrophe S behind the noun, and that signifies possession. In the ancient Chinese and modern Mandarin, it's a character by itself. Then the third character there is light or lightly, not taking something with the same degree of gravitas that you did before. And then the last character is the character for death. So when you string that together, people's like death, well, what does that mean? It just means that people regard death lightly. That is, they don't care if they lose their lives. Therefore, it is valid to translate a line like this into the people regard death lightly, or go with the translation that I've ended up with, and that is the people's disregard for death. It flows better into the next line. Either way, you can see exactly what the original Chinese is trying to say. And now we ask the question, why would people regard death lightly? This makes a lot of sense when you understand what we talked about in the previous chapter. in the previous chapter, it starts out with a question from Lao Zi to the ruler, and that was, what happens when people no longer fear death? If death is the deterrence, don't you lose the deterring power of the deterrent when people lose their fear of death? So from the previous chapter, chapter 74, we saw these two lines. As you can see there, line 1 says, people do not fear death. How can they be threatened with death? So you can see the previous chapter and this one are actually linked. Then we go to the second line in this third section. And I want to single out one character there. The last character in line 8, this entire line is translated as, is due to the glut in the ruler's pursuit of life. And this is continuation from the previous line, the people's disregard for death, that is due to the glut in the ruler's pursuit of life. So now let's talk about the last character there. This character is pronounced Hou. The pinyin Hou, it looks like, to the native English speaker, it's going to look like it should be pronounced like how are you, the how. No, it's actually Hou. And that's just the way that pinyin was designed. Some of the sounds are not intuitively obvious to a native English speaker. And also, do not mistake this as Hugh. So for instance, when you see a name like Houston, the Hou is pronounced with a U sound. That also isn't the way it is supposed to sound in Mandarin. It's Hou. And in modern Mandarin, there's only one meaning associated with this character. It means thick, and that's it. Now, thick, the English word, has multiple connected meanings. You might say an expression like, to be in the thick of it. What do you mean? You just mean that you're being involved in a center of something that's happening, that where there's a lot of things to look at, a lot of things to experience, right in the thick of it. So thick, the English word, has a lot of tangential meanings associated with it. In modern Mandarin, thick is just thickness. But in ancient times, it definitely had tangential meanings. In this case, thick is more like richness, like a lot, like luxurious or extravagant. That is the context being used here. In the ancient context, it means luxurious or extravagant. Specifically, it is referring to the luxuries that is enjoyed at the higher levels, like for instance, the ruler or the ruling elite. And that thickness or that richness at the higher level is in stark contrast with the lack, the poverty among people. It's like when the people are starving to death, the higher level, the ruling elites are stuffing themselves with food until they are just about to throw up. That's the kind of contrast that we're seeing here. So think the thick in the ancient Chinese is very similar to when we, in modern English, the slang, when we say living large, like, oh yeah, that person, that celebrity is living large. And what we mean when we say living large is living like a very wealthy and successful person. So large in that context is being used as a reference to richness, wealth. Same thing here. So the contrast that we see that Lao Tzu is talking about between the ruling elite and the poor, average, everyday people, the peasants, that contrast is a wrongness. It is an injustice. And that's what leads to discontent and anger. So then we're ready, I think, to look at the entire line. Due to the glut in the ruler's pursuit of life. So now you can see exactly what it means. It's all about the ruler's pursuit of luxuries in life, particularly compared against the starvation and misery of the people. Now, historically, and this is unfortunate, an unfortunate commentary about human nature, whenever there's tyranny, there's always this kind of corruption. That is, the tyrant and his friends, his favored nobles of the court, will always be so corrupt as to be drowning in luxuries while the people suffer. That has always been the case, not just ancient China, throughout all of human history, East or West. This is a repeating pattern since the dawn of humanity. And it's always leading to the collapse or disintegration of the ruling elite. That's always the pattern. And it seems as if, after like the 100th time that it's happened in human history, it seems as if we human beings have not learned the lessons of history. And the pattern looks like this. There's the decadence of the ruling elites, particularly as the people are suffering hardship. And that leads to very justified anger of the people. And the enjoyment of the luxuries, not going to be kept a secret, it's going to be flaunted. And that leads to the fall of the empire, something that's happened many, many times throughout history. Okay, so the last line of the third section makes complete sense. So they disregard death, is what it says in line 9. And we can see that, yes, human beings do not always fear death. There's going to be times when they set aside their usual instinctive fear of death. Human beings are capable of doing that. They can and will disregard death or regard death lightly when they fight for a cause. Example, when they are sacrificing themselves for the greater good. We've seen example after example of this throughout history. People are willing to die for something greater than themselves. If they're clear what it is, what effects they will have by sacrificing their lives, very often they're glad to do it. Then, on a more personal scale, ensure the well-being of one's family. So think about how there are so many times we see that people are willing to do whatever it takes to ensure the safety and protection and well-being of one's family or one's children. If, and on a less severe level, if we're talking about breaking the law as an example, when there are starving children, you can kind of understand how someone would decide to resort to theft or robbery to get the resources that is needed to feed the starving children. So the well-being of one's family is a powerful motivating factor, and it can definitely lead to a disregard for death or regarding death lightly. Like, you're going to do anything for the ones that you love. And then finally, right or wrong or injustice. So we talked about how when people perceive that they have nothing and the ruling elite, they have everything, that they will perceive as a wrong, as an injustice, and they want to do something about it. So we can tell that tyranny and corruption, well, includes all of the above. So all those are factors that basically light the fuse of the explosive. Now, I want to take a broader look at human history and talk about repeating patterns. So remember, the Tao is all about patterns that recur throughout history. When we master these patterns, we can identify the same patterns in our own lives, and then when we need to, break the pattern so that we can liberate ourselves from their constraints. In terms of historical patterns for humanity, let me use a table here. So across the top, you see the ruler, leader, that's the ruling elite in the context of a kingdom. It could be a leader in a business setting. It could be parents of a family, as an example. So that's the higher level of the hierarchy. And then on the left across, going top down, that's the people. That's the lower level of the power hierarchy. So the situation can be good or bad. There can be suffering or abundance. So I want to start with something that's not seen in a government context. It is possible that when you have a religious or family context, that the higher level is suffering while the lower level enjoy the fruits of that, but not in government. It is possible, as an example, religious leaders will put themselves through some sort of sacrifice. So think about Jesus on the cross, salvation for all of humanity. That's the context, that's the manifestation. So the sacrifice is for the benefits of the people, higher level benefiting the lower level while the higher level is suffering. In a religious context, it's possible. In a family context, it is also possible. Think about the parents who suffer hardship to provide good things for their children. They want their children to have a better life than they did. So they themselves can suffer, that's okay. But they want to provide luxuries, sometimes for their children. And of course, that can get into spoiling the kids. That's a totally different topic. The point here is that in government, there has not been an instance where the ruler, the ruling elite, is suffering hardship while the people enjoy prosperity. Now, the other three cases are definitely possible, definitely more of a likelihood that we have seen throughout human history. So the second one would be when times are bad. It isn't so bad for the people if they know that the leadership is right there with them. So if the struggles, the hardship is common at the lower level, the level of the people, the subjects, the citizens of the empire, but also at the higher level, the rulers are going through the same issues that they're going through. They don't set themselves apart from the people. They are in the trenches, struggling, helping, just like all the people are. Definitely the entire thing, whether it's empire or kingdom, everybody is going to be willing to work through the difficulties together. Indeed, adversity can bring people closer. Adversity can form a lasting bond of trust and mutual assistance. So that can be a very positive situation. Even though the overall environment is harsh, it's okay, morale can be high as people band together to help one another. Now, it is also possible to have the opposite. So diagonally opposite to that cell is when things are good, and the goodness is enjoyed in terms of the commonwealth that everybody benefits. The rulers, the ruling elite, the nobles, the officials, they benefit, but the people do as well. There is then celebration in the kingdom, celebration in the empire. That's also a positive thing. So this cell and the one diagonally across from it, these are the positive manifestations. Then we have the last one. The last one is exactly what Lao Zi is pointing to with the 9 lines that we have studied so far. Discontent leading to revolt. Why? Because as you can see in this column, the ruler, the leader, is enjoying the abundance while the people are suffering. That's when they decide to rise up. So now we have sufficient information to sum everything up in the third section, and now we can also map the ancient context into the modern world. For the modern world, this section speaks to the meaning of life. So that's a major topic. That is an important topic. What about the meaning of life? Well, just a reminder, you are both the sovereign ruler and subject in your own life. You are ruling yourself, so to speak. And the disregard for death, in this case, it maps to the loss of meaning that you feel, that you experience in living your life. And I hope that's easy to grasp. That's how they map from one to the other. How does that happen? How do you lose the meaning of life for yourself? How do you lose that zest for living that you had before? Well, it can totally happen when there is an excessive pursuit of worldly pleasures, because sooner or later, you will become numb to them. That is, there's so much goodness that you've been enjoying, you've overstimulated your senses. That overindulgence leads to immediate gratification, but then in the long run, you're going to suffer the underlying issues that have not gone away. This is linked to the first point in this chapter about the longing for spiritual sustenance. These are all connected. And the easiest metaphor that I can use is just what happened recently. Everybody probably had Thanksgiving dinner. And we all know the people who stuff themselves at the Thanksgiving dinner table. You can certainly satisfy physical hunger when you're wolfing down your food, but then gorging yourself can lead to physical discomfort, as we all know and probably have experienced. And we can actually extend from that to cover all aspects of life. Basically, what we're saying is that just like the discomfort that you feel after gorging yourself on food, going overboard in any material pursuit is just a bad idea. So there are many other examples that we can apply this to. We have all seen or heard of examples about people who aggressively pursue money or status, fame and fortune, while neglecting one's family and friends. Haven't we all seen that many times? And we have also seen how sometimes you're going to find somebody who appears to have a full social calendar, very busy with social life, and yet, ironically, still ends up feeling lonely. Is that possible? Indeed it is. If those social engagements, those personal connections are shallow, they do not address the deep spiritual needs that we have for that connection, then loneliness cannot be escaped. So what we're talking about, anytime you go overboard in material pursuits, in any aspect of life, it leads to the erosion of your joy. So let's go ahead and map the ancient context to modern life. Ancient times, straightforward expression of what Lao Tzu was trying to say, and the disregard for death among the people due to the ruler's gluttonous life, the glut in living large. living with luxuries while the people starve, thus the disregard for death. Of course, now we see that it makes perfect sense. And then mapping that to modern life, as we have just talked about, the loss in terms of the meaning of life that you experience, the zest that you had before in living life, how can that happen? Well, it can definitely happen due to excessive pursuit of pleasures, specifically material world pleasures. And then material things you discover cannot fill the empty void. So that is why I say that this last part wraps around back to the first part. It's connected. It's about that spiritual yearning. So now we have seen the three sections. We have seen how they map back and forth from ancient times to modern times. We are now ready to talk about all of them together. So first, you can easily see that here we have the three progressions from the three sections presented by Lao Tzu. There's the hunger, there's the difficulty in governance, and then there's the disregard for death. And that is due to a particular reason: excessive taxation, the meddling, the interference from the rulers in the livelihood of the people, and the gluttonous life of the ruler. That's clear. And that's what reinforces the misery in the starvation, the difficulty in governing them, and then the people's disregard for death. When you look at it this way, you see that, whoa, if somebody knew to combine these lines, to look at them together vertically, then that's a recipe for disaster for the kingdom or the empire. And you can predict the demise of the ruling elites just based on this. Then the whole thing in the modern context is similar. We have the mapping of the ancient times to that spiritual hunger and yearning, as we discussed, the difficulty in maintaining positive relationships, good personal connections, the loss of meaning, losing the meaning of life, the zest in living. All of these are problems. Why? What causes them? Well, the middle column there, excessive materialism, that is, being so mired in the material world that you lose sight of the spiritual. Excessive attachments, what that is interfering, meddling in other people's business. You cannot leave it alone. Then, excessive pursuit of pleasures, physical sensations, thrills. These will eventually lead to you being numb and jaded, and that's detrimental for your overall joy and happiness. So looking at the right column down, the feeling of emptiness when you don't have spiritual food for thought, spiritual sustenance. Then the lack of harmony in personal relationships leading to friction, leading to contention. Then lastly, the lower right-hand corner, material things you discover cannot fill the empty void. So these are definitely problems that can be encountered in modern life. And in fact, sometimes we see it happen to other people. I think we're very interested in seeing how to prevent it for ourselves or take proactive steps to ensure that it never happens. And in fact, Lao Tzu has sage advice for all of us on exactly what to do so that we can avoid this particular fate. So beyond the third section that we're looking at here, and indeed the summary for all three sections, we're going to now get into the final two lines of this chapter of the Daodejing. We are now on line 10. Line 10 says, therefore, those who do not strive for living. So this is important. And let me explain why that is important. There's also the potential for misunderstanding in this particular line. So strive for living. Let's talk about that. Specifically, to strive for living in the context of the Daodejing means to obsessively pursue the good life. So when I put obsessively there, you can tell that it's not a positive thing. It's a negative path in the perspective of Lao Tzu. The reason why Lao Tzu sees it as being negative is because obsessive attachments lead to destructive, damaging outcomes that are harmful to you. So this is something that can be a little confusing to someone who has not encountered Tao teachings. In the West, when we say striving, oftentimes that word is used in a positive context. When we say striving, to strive to do something, it means to work hard against adversity, to be very proactive, to have this discipline that leads you to success. So in the West, we see it as a good thing to strive. In the Daodejing, the word is used in a different way. To strive is to try too hard, becoming too attached that you trip over yourself in your eagerness to get something done. So then it becomes like a form of self-sabotage when you're striving like that. Indeed, in the Tao, it's going to be mentioned that to live the Tao life means being without strife. That is, you don't need to work that hard. Working so hard excessively will only be counterproductive. You actually end up working against yourself. So the Tao is about finding the optimal balance. It's not a bad thing to work hard, but you don't want to overdo it. When you work hard, you get better results, more results, but then you want to stop when it's optimal. So this is the context in which we are talking about striving. We need to let go of the striving because it leads to tension, stress. It leads to effects that are very much opposite to the flow of the Tao. That's why when Lao Tzu says not strive for living, that's the positive path. The reason why he says that is because when you don't have the tension and stress of striving all the time, you can live life in a way that is smooth, that is graceful, that is nevertheless very effective, very high achieving, without the nerve-wracking details, without the things that keep you up at night, make you nervous. That's the best of all possible worlds. So now that you see why that's positive, negative, keep in mind to strive for living is to be obsessive, is to be doing it too much. To not do that is to let go of it and relax. The Tao is about approaching life from that relaxed frame of mind. Easy, smooth, yet effective and excellent. Let's move on. So line 11, this is where I talked about how the chapter title can be a little bit misleading to the Western readership because the last two characters value living. Let's break them down. Two characters, 贵生. I know the pinyin is going to cause some people to say gui. It's not gui, it's gui. 贵生. And this expression is no longer used in modern Mandarin, not in this way. If you want to say value life, cherish life, you will say it in a different way in modern Mandarin. You may say 爱惜生命. You will never say anything close to 贵生. It's an expression that's no longer being used. So literally, the first character means value, high value. And then the second character there means life. That's what leads to the misunderstanding and the misconception. It can be easily misunderstood by translators as a good thing, a positive thing. As I mentioned, the question that people will ask is, well, shouldn't we all value life? I mean, I value life. You should too. Well, the real meaning is the same as in the previous slide, strive for living. The obsessive pursuit, putting too high of a value on the luxuries, the good things in life, and you pursue them to your own detriment. So kind of tricky for people to understand. And in fact, there are mistranslations out there based on the misunderstanding. That is a sure sign that the translator or author has never actually gone through any kind of authentic teaching from an authentic tradition of the Tao. The meaning that we're talking about here, these are drawn from the teachings of Tao masters that in every generation since the time of Lao Tzu, they've taught this line exactly the same way. And some of them, like some of the grandmasters that I have known in my personal acquaintance, are able to elevate their insights to tell us how we can do that exactly. How can we live our lives, not strive for living, but live our lives in the way that is congruent with the Tao? To simplify here, what we're going to be talking about is that those who do not strive for living, those who let go of that attachment, are much better off than those who put too high of a value on living. So now I think it's going to make perfect sense. Well, look at the entire line. Are better than those who value living is the translation. And those who do not pursue luxuries are better off than those who do. So that is the overall meaning, and embedded in that is the subtext that, as I have explained, the Tao is not opposed to the pursuit of the good things in life. The Tao is definitely noting that there's a point when one can go overboard. So remember the example about how gluttony leads to physical discomfort. Same kind of thing applied to all aspects of life. So those who watch for that, those who are mindful of that, and then hold themselves back and not go overboard, they are far better off than those who don't have that level of awareness. Those who obsessively chase after happiness end up unhappy. Haven't we all seen that in the people that we know? And some of us indeed will say, oh, I resemble that remark. I've been there and done that. Ironically, because I obsessively chased after happiness, I ended up unhappy. I ended up with the opposite of what I was pursuing. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, from shifting from the negative to the positive, here's the Tao. Those who flow with nature become naturally happy. So happiness is a natural state. To get that natural happiness, the thing to do is to flow with nature, or as we say, flow with the Tao. The Tao is all about nature. Now, to say it another way, those with outward focus, what I mean by that is looking at the material world and being attracted by it, being distracted by it. Those who have that focus on things end up empty-handed. The hand that's reaching out to grasp material objects come back empty-handed. Conversely, those with inward focus, and when I say inward focus, I'm talking about turning one's gaze from looking at the external world into the internal, mental, and spiritual landscape, that's the Tao. Those who do that attain spiritual fulfillment. That in turn radiates outward as personal fulfillment, fulfillment in personal relationships, fulfillment in living one's life. So it's the difference between the empty void and being fulfilled. So this is the most important point to be made in this particular chapter. It's life affirming, it's also directing, it's helpful, it's mentoring for all of us, it's guiding for all of us to live our lives in the best possible way. So I want to spend a little bit more time on it just to make sure that we drive home the point. This is the true value of the Daodejing that we're discussing now. Outward versus inward. Do you turn your gaze to the external material world, or do you turn that gaze inward to your own thoughts, your own feelings, where you really want to be, your vision for the future, your dreams? So there's the external, and then there's the internal. The emphasis is very different. So the outward is the last line that's talking about value living, 贵生. Remember, that's about putting an excessively high value on the luxuries in life, like the ancient rulers who lived it up while the people starved. So that's the visual that really drives home the point. And then to the right-hand side, not strive for a living, that means letting go, withdrawing from the rat race, not having to be so obsessive, so attached, and then living life with that graceful flow. Okay, let's talk about exactly what each one entails. So on the left-hand side, we're talking about pursuit of life and rewards in the material world. When I say rewards, I'm purposely being generic. The rewards can be money, yes. It can be material acquisitions, yes. House, cars, jewelry, clothing, etc. All that. But it can also be the intangibles like fame, like prestige, social standing, social position, all that kind of stuff included in what we say, what we talk about when we say fame and fortune. So it's those pursuits, but it also includes physical sensations, physical pleasures that one can pursue as well in the material world. So in this particular chapter, Lao Tzu specifically talks about the ancient rulers who indulged in that, indulged in the luxuries while the people suffered. And then we bring that into the present, into the modern world. We see that it's about the ones who seek fame and fortune with external focus. So I think that all makes sense on the left-hand side. Let's take a look at what happens when the arrows are not pointing out, but pointing in. And the focus is not on the dollar sign, but on the balance in life. So that's inward, turning the gaze inward, not strive for living, letting all that go. This is refrain from obsessive striving or attachments in life. So this is represented not by the ancient rulers, but by the ancient sages who lived in harmony among people. And then mapping that to our world today, this is about spiritual Tao cultivators who seek greater awareness with introspection. So the cultivation work is internal. There's a part that external practice can play when we discuss our understanding with one another, when we get together, like right now, to talk. But a lot of it happens on the inside. Now, I want to first talk about the specifics of the outward focus, the external emphasis, before wrapping it up with the internal focus, the internal emphasis. So the outward, as I mentioned, is value living. Those who seek material gains end up empty and exhausted, as I mentioned. Those who seek sensory stimulation end up numb and desensitized. That can totally happen when you get overstimulated. Then what I suggest is that it will be better just to keep yourself away from sensory stimulation for a while so that you can regain your balance. Then those who seek thrills end up jaded and disinterested. We definitely have among us, and maybe we ourselves as well, the adrenaline junkies. That can only be carried out for so long before you are exhausting yourself. So these three lines are all connected in that same mentality with the focus on the external material world. And I'm not saying that all of these are bad things. These can all be good in a smaller measure. So the consequence, your inner self is starved of spiritual sustenance. That's exactly what we talked about in the first section. Your personal relationships are neglected and in disarray. That's exactly what we talked about in the second section. And then your zest for life has faded. Nothing seems to matter. That's the disregard. That's the loss in the meaning of life that we talked about. So that can happen. Now, there's more. I want to be very specific with some examples on exactly what is commonly seen. Even in the Tao cultivating world, there are people who are cultivating the Tao, or they appear to do so, but they're doing so without substance. So remember, the external focus is all about surface appearance without the core. So what I want to do is to give you the example of the Ching vow. So here it says the Ching vow is bidirectional. What is the Ching vow? Well, let me share with everyone that there are two parts, and this is for those that want to take the vow. You don't have to take the vow, but for those who do, there are two parts to it. Part one is what's coming in through the mouth in terms of what you eat. And that vow, the vegetarian vow, to be mindful of the food that comes in. So in that vow, the person taking the vow wants to be more compassionate by adopting a vegetarian diet, to be mindful of the food that comes in. The other part, equally important, oftentimes overlooked, is to be mindful about the words that go out of the mouth, that are uttered. So in Buddhism, this is known as right speech. Buddhism has what they call the Eightfold Path, with things with elements like the right view, right action. It's all about having the right mindset, right perspective, etc. And the third among the Eightfold Path, among the 8 items, is right speech, samyak vak in Buddhism. And what it means is to abstain from lying, from speech that is abusive or divisive, and also from idle chatter, which will be rumor mongering. So in the Tao, it is about refraining from pointless complaints. Tao teachings recognize that sometimes you can have complaints that are constructive, that will lead to a positive change, an improvement. But let us all be honest and frank with ourselves. Most of the complaints that we ourselves utter in daily life, they don't go anywhere. They are complaints for the purpose of complaining. They don't actually change anything. They're just pointless complaints. Same thing with the criticisms that we utter against other people. A lot of times we just talk about other people behind their backs. Let's be honest. We're not telling them what we really think, but we're criticizing them among ourselves out of their earshot. Again, pointless. Again, something that we should watch out for, be mindful of, and indeed, something that we should refrain from doing. Overall, someone who takes the Qingkou vow will be very careful should be very careful about what is said. There can be discouraging negativity that may hinder or harm other people. And so one possibility that is sometimes observed is that you're going to have people in a Tao practicing community where someone has taken the Qingkou vow and they're very big on becoming a vegetarian. They feel superior to those who have not taken the vow. They are critical of the people who haven't. So when you see that, immediately looking at this, you can tell that they are giving the appearance of piety without the substance of the Tao. It is all about compassion to want to have this vegetarian diet that minimizes your impact on the environment, and yet when that person is expressing complaints or criticism, that's revealing a lack of empathy and compassion. Therefore, that is one manifestation of what we're talking about. So it is, and it's not just the Qingkou vow. Overall, it's possible that one's practicing the Tao makes one arrogant and feel superior to other people. And this includes people who talk about the Tao, people who teach the Tao, write about the Tao, authors, teachers. Oftentimes, as you go further into the practice, you're going to observe that there are those who can talk about it, write about it, teach it, without being able to put anything into action. So it's a deadly trap, in my opinion. So another example, students of the Tao who cannot be consistent. So this right here is a common problem in every generation of students of the Tao. Now, this is something that Lao Zi has expressed in the Daodejing itself. In chapter 41, he's got these two lines. He talks about high-level people, then he talks about average people. Average people here of the Tao, they sometimes keep it and sometimes lose it. So this is a problem that's been persistent since the beginning and probably will be with us for as long as there are human beings. And that's because there are so many distractions in the material world. The problem is common throughout history. And it's something that we need to watch out for ourselves. And then the question becomes, can you be more consistent? Here, I'm going to humbly present that I myself have been trying to practice this for the last 20 plus years. I've been trying to be consistent in my own practice, always showing up for these meetings. Now, that's not always the case. I have seen many instances where other people will only, as an example, show up at the temple when they have a lecture they are to deliver. Other times, they just stay away, they stay home, they do other things. That is not consistency. That's exactly what Lao Tzu is talking about here. So you're not going to catch me doing that. I am going to be as consistent as I possibly can be. That is my personal guarantee to myself. Yet another example, those who project the appearance without the substance. So here's the example for that specifically, spiritual seekers who keep trying different paths. And that's because they cannot commit to any one path. They are dabblers. they are not actually serious in their spiritual quest. And Lao Zi points this out as well. In Daodejing, chapter 53, he says, the great Tao is broad and plain, but people like the side paths. Again, the material world is so full of distractions that there are all these appealing looking side paths that people wander into. In our world, that translates into people who, this Taoism, Taoist philosophy, this seems interesting. Let me dabble in it for a while. And after some time, they switch to something else. And this other school of philosophy, I'm going to try that too. There's nothing wrong with keeping one's options open and then trying different things so you get an idea. The problem that we see all the time is that the process of switching from one path to another never stops. And therefore, very little progress is made with any particular path. This is like digging a well in one location to a certain depth, 1 foot. There's no water. I'm going to try a different spot. Digging, 1 foot depth. There's no water. I'm going to try another spot. That process never stops, and therefore no water ever appears in any of the shallow diggings. Now, let me switch to the other perspective, the internal inward gaze. And remember, this is the next to last line, the penultimate line that says, not strive for living, that's better. So this is the internal approach. And there are 3 key points in living free from strife. So this is coming to us from the sages that have studied the Tao all their lives. The first is as Lao Tzu describes in chapter 27 of the Daodejing. Lao Tzu says, good traveling does not leave tracks. Good speech does not seek faults. Let's contemplate that for just a moment. Good traveling in this case is a metaphor for moving through the journey of life. Not leaving tracks is to live a life that is smooth, minimal, a light touch, without impact, a harmful impact on the environment, on other people. So the metaphor that we can use is the teaching about the correct way to meditate. So Zen master would explain that think about the thoughts that enter your mind as if you are looking at a pond and you see the reflection of an eagle flying overhead. When the eagle has passed from view, disappears, the reflection disappears from the pond. The eagle has flown far away. The pond has not even a ripple to mark the passing of the eagle that has flown by. In the same way, you would want to treat your thoughts in meditation like the reflection of the eagle, let it pass, leaving no trace. Applying this to life, you would want to live your life in such a seamless, smooth, and graceful way that you come and go without leaving a trace. That's what this means. Good traveling does not leave tracks. Good speech does not seek faults. This goes back to the complaints and criticisms that I was referring to, that there are people who appear pious, and yet, listen to them for a while, get to know them, you will hear many complaints, many criticisms. They don't really have the substance of Tao cultivation. So here's the reminder for everybody, living life like the reflection of an eagle in the pond. When the eagle has flown past, that's it. The eagle is gone, leaving no trace behind, free of any attachments. That is the first key. Here's the second key. Lao Tzu describes this in another chapter of the Daodejing, chapter 38. High virtue is not virtuous, therefore it has virtue. What that says is that true virtue is not always talking about being virtuous, reminding oneself to be virtuous. It is not intentionally virtuous, it is natural. Therefore, it has virtue, it is true virtue. True virtue flows naturally from the heart. There is therefore no need to appear virtuous. It is only when it does not flow naturally from the heart that one makes this intentional effort on purpose to appear as virtuous as possible. In modern times, we say virtue signaling. So virtue signaling would not be the expression of true virtue. And then we have the third key point about living free from strife, to not have any of that striving in living your life. And this is also described by Lao Tzu, this time, chapter 41. Building virtue appears inactive. True substance appears inconstant. So I want everyone to pay attention that this is addressing appearance, which is external, and then true substance, internal, true virtue, also internal. So what this is saying is that virtues that are cultivated within, not going to be necessarily obvious to other people. That is, the work happens within the internal, mental, and spiritual landscape. Therefore, other people may not even know that that is what's going on. And because of that, you have an internal guide. You have a compass within that tells you where you are going in life. Now, that is going to, because you have that North Star internally, you are then free to vary your approach. You can be flexible on going to that goal. The goal itself is constant. It's Tao cultivation. It's greater awareness. It's enlightenment. How you get there can vary. Sometimes it's about reading. Sometimes it's about meditation. Sometimes it's about discussion with other people. Whatever gets you there can be very flexible. So the constant internal guide allows for that flexible approach. But then from other people, they don't know about the internal guide. It's invisible to them. They don't know about the internal virtue. It's invisible to them. Therefore, from their perspective, you appear to be inactive in the virtues, and you appear to be inconstant because you are changing your approach. So I hope that makes sense. So that is the last, and just like this chapter has been 3 sections or 3 lines, these are the 3 major points about living life in accordance with the Tao. Let's go ahead and sum it up for this one here. Not striving for living, the inward focus, the inward internal emphasis. Lao Tzu points to this as the better path. For the ancient ruler, which we started out with in this chapter, the better path is the path to greatness. For you and I, for all of us living in the modern world, the better path is the path to your best life. That's why we call it the Tao. The Tao is the path or the way. It is the path that we should all be on. And that's why the last 2 lines of this particular chapter ends with, therefore, those who do not strive for living are better than those who value living. Those 2 lines may have been puzzling before, but as you can see, when we put it under a microscope at this, it is as clear as can be. Lao Tzu, in originally writing these lines, had every intention to explain things simply. It's just that the complexity of life makes us sometimes misunderstand or misinterpret his words. So this is the most important thing that we needed to talk about today. We're now ready to jump to the summary for everything that we have discussed. For chapter 75, part 1, we went over this last time. Remember the 3 sections? They were about spiritual sustenance, the hunger for spiritual sustenance, because you must feed the mind and spirit. So my suggestion is that we are all here to partake in the Tao, that this is what will feed that hunger. Number 2, managing relationships. And this is where we need to watch out for interference, causes resentment. We want to instead strengthen connections, not weaken connections with other people. And there's a whole bunch we can say about that, but this is the summary. Number 3, living the best possible life. Now that you have gone through this chapter in great detail, you know it's not about the glut of living. That's what the ancient tyrants did, much to their regret, as their empire had fallen. It is about lasting joy and happiness, and the last part of our presentation today was about exactly that. How do we get there? How do we live a life like that? And this is the summary for that section, for that last section. Number 1, be aware of the outward approach. We've used it ourselves. We see other people use it with the focus on the external material world. It's just that we can see so many people still trapped in it. We don't want to be trapped in it. We want to liberate ourselves from that material world perspective. If we are trapped with everybody else, sooner or later, we're going to see, just like them, that everything the material world offers is illusory. It's an illusion. And number 2 is to turn your gaze inward, the internal approach, the internal perspective. And that's living life with a light touch. Remember, traveling without leaving tracks. Leave no trace behind, being free from attachments. Integrate virtues until they become a part of you. You're not just an honorable, you're not just someone who's trying to practice honor. You are an honorable person who's naturally practicing honor as part of your very nature. It is impossible for you to be anything other than a paragon of honor. Number 3, follow the guidance of an internal compass. That is, the work happens internally, cultivation happens internally. Your goal, your aspiration, your dream, your vision, these are for you to know. As you are making your way toward the realization of that vision, you are free to vary your approach because you have your internal compass. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.